Thank you for joining us on Health Diary. My name is Gladys Gashanjan. We're coming to you from the Concord Hotel and Suites. Now, epilepsy, commonly known as kifafa, is shrouded with a lot of misconceptions and myths. And of course, this creates a lot of stigma and discrimination against those living with this condition. Now, what it also does is that it makes them shy away from treatment. Now, here's the thing. 70% of those that are newly diagnosed with this condition can actually be successfully treated. Today, we shed light on epilepsy, a conversation that most people would rather not have, but today we make time for it. But before we get to it, here now is the fact of the matter. Epilepsy is a disorder which affects the nervous system in the brain, causing seizures, and provoked repetitive seizures, often leading to a loss of consciousness, are common in persons living with epilepsy. According to a study conducted in rural Kenya and other African countries, prevalence of epilepsy is about 20 cases in every 1,000 people. Research in Kenya rates birth trauma, infections of the brain, and head injuries as the top causes. Other risk factors include a family history of seizures. Epilepsy can affect any person irrespective of age, sex, economic, or geographic location, and it is easily treatable when detected early, and more than 80% of patients can become seizure-free. Epilepsy is not contagious.
I work with an organization called Kiserem Epilepsy Foundation. We do create awareness about epilepsy. I was 28 because I was working in Iraq as a pastry chef. Then I started having these convulsions, these seizures, but I didn't know, first of all, what was happening with me, because they were coming, especially maybe after job, after working. When I go to the cube, I now start convulsing. When I went to the doctor, they did an MRI scan, then they did an EEG. But they never explained to me how mine came, because the doctor says sometimes it just comes. It can even come at any age. And it was the lowest point of my life. Honestly, I never knew anyone who had epilepsy. So again, that was a challenge. The last time I had an episode was like 6 months ago or 7 months ago. I had a girlfriend. When she realized that I had epilepsy, she dumped me because of the condition. So the stigmatization is real outside, and also you also have other friends that they backbite you. We also had another lady that was even raped by her father because she has epilepsy. So to talk the truth, a lot of, especially women, they pass through a lot of things, and these women, nobody talks about them. So we are appealing to the people who are watching us to take care of these people, because epilepsy can come at any age. I use a drug called Levipill 250. And in a month, I use more than 3,000 shillings. So I will also tell the government to help us, because NHIF does not cover epilepsy. So these drugs are really expensive. There are people who will even tell you, do I eat or will I take the medicine?
Epilepsy is a condition that most people would rather not have a conversation about, but the truth of the matter is, with 77 people diagnosed with the condition out of 100,000 people in Kenya, I think it's time to pay attention. And to help us with this conversation, Millicent Waithira-Wairimu, who is living with epilepsy, and Dr. Simon Kariuki, who is the Chairman, National Epilepsy Coordination Committee, and also an epilepsy researcher at KEMRI. Thank you for your time. I'll start with you, Daktari. What exactly is going on in the brain for an epileptic to get seizures?
The brain usually has neurons, and the neurons are always connected with each other. And we have two sets of neurons. So there are those neurons that are causing excitation, and there are those neurons that are causing inhibition. So every time the excitation neurons are firing, the ones that are usually supposed to inhibit them also are in action, so that they can check each other. So in a person with epilepsy, the excitatory neurons usually overwork and work more than the inhibitory neurons, which I think leads to the seizures and then epilepsy.
Okay, now according to a study you conducted, I think in rural Kenya and other African countries, half of those with active convulsive epilepsy were children, and 69% of the seizures began in childhood. What's the connection? Explain that.
We weren't very surprised when we found that most of the epilepsy was beginning in childhood, since we already know that most of the risk factors for epilepsy are common at that age, and the most important one is the perinatal complications, all adverse perinatal events, and also infections such as malaria and bacterial meningitis. So what happens is birth injury and those infections that touch on the brain cause some localized damage or diffuse damage, eventually after some time leading to epilepsy.
So for you, Millicent, when did you get to know you had epilepsy?
What made me know I had epilepsy, I used to mess my bed. I used to urinate, and then when I wake up in the morning, I used to feel tired, and I felt it's time to go to the hospital. Yeah.
Okay, now, Dr. some people develop seizures in their childhood, whereas others, it's actually, they get their first seizure in their teenagehood, into their mid-30s, even, middle age. Why the discrepancy?
It will depend on the risk factors. So if probably you get a hand injury when you are 19 years, so that's when you are going to get the epilepsy. And then it can also be specific to the epilepsy syndrome that somebody is having. And one of the best example is the juvenile myoclonic epilepsy, which tends to happen in the teenage age. So when people become adolescents and when they are young adults, and then they might live with that epilepsy for life. Another one is about epilepsies that might be genetically determined, and in that case you cannot be able to predict when that is going to happen. It might just happen at any age depending as to when they have been exposed to risk factors. And for some people it might happen in old age because of neurodegenerative diseases like dementia in the old, or maybe somebody gets stroke and hypertension when they are an adult, so they can get epilepsy at that time.
Now, Millicent, do you have epilepsy in your family?
No, nobody.
So you're the first person.
Yeah.
And that means you sharing this with your family, that was quite an interesting experience, right?
They say it's just a myth. They say I don't have epilepsy. My mom says, no, you don't have epilepsy. Nobody has ever had epilepsy in the family. Never believe you have epilepsy. So anytime she sees me like taking my medication, she tells me, no, don't take it.
When you went to see a specialist, because you had a few things you could not answer, they told you had, is that the first time you found out you had nocturnal, or it took a while before they found out what exactly you were dealing with?
First, when I went to see a neurologist, they thought I developed epilepsy as a result of a tragic accident. So they thought maybe I had a brain injury and or brain trauma. So after they did something called EEG, they did a brain scan and an MRI. That's when they told me I have nocturnal epilepsy and I have to accept it. Yeah, so because I didn't accept that I have epilepsy, I used not to take medication, but I talked to one of the psychiatrists and she told me you have to accept you have epilepsy so that like you can take the medication and manage epilepsy, because I used to get like recurrent seizures. Like a seizure could attack me once and like 10 times because I wasn't managing it.
How are the symptoms now compared to before?
I have minimal seizures and the fear of sleeping at night. I used to fear sleeping at night. I used to stay up to like around 5 a.m.
Why? Because you didn't want to get the seizures?
Yeah, exactly. And the fear of getting nocturnal epilepsy is, it's like you're struggling. You're struggling between death and life. That's how I feel, because I still have sleep paralysis.
Yeah, so that's a problem that usually happens during the rapid eye movement stage of sleep. And that is when we are usually dreaming. So the way the brain is made is that because we are dreaming about very vigorous activities, then the brain has to control your physical movement. And each and every one of us, when we are in that stage, our muscles usually get paralyzed. And it is usually very coordinated, so that by the time you are returning back to consciousness after sleep, then the muscle activity comes back. So for her situation, when somebody has paralysis, which sometimes can affect each and every one of us on an occasional basis, it is when you wake up from sleep and then your muscle activity has not recovered. And it usually brings a lot of fear and I fully agree with her.
And the symptoms, do they vary from one type of epilepsy to another, or is it dependent on the severity?
Each and every epilepsy syndrome has different symptoms. So like juvenile myoclonic epilepsy is the one that usually presents with what she's saying, generalized tonic-clonic seizures on awakening. That is just about when you are waking up. And these people also experience multiple seizures like absences and also myoclonic jerks. So you find the hands are jerking. Generalized tonic-clonic seizures is the one that takes a lot of toll on patients because they usually lose consciousness and they will not even remember what happened. Frontal lobe epilepsy, which affects the front part of the brain, and it presents very differently. In fact, it's usually very confusing because the kind of behaviors that they will be having, even if you witness them, you will probably think they are pretending. So sometimes they are in bed, they just lift their hand like this, and then they sit up, and then after some time, they go back to sleep because they are usually very brief. Then we have other people who will just be screaming during the night. And you know, when somebody screams during the night, they might think that probably you are having night terrors, which is a sleep disorder, in which case the problem will not end up being correctly diagnosed.
And now that we're talking about diagnosis, we will find out right after this break if there's room for misdiagnosis and also in terms of the myths and misconceptions about epilepsy. That after this short break. Thank you for staying with Health Diary. My name is Gladys Kashanja. We're still on that conversation, epilepsy, one that is shunned by many, but the reality of epilepsy is here with us. I still have Dr. and Millicent with me talking about the same. Now, Dr. Is there a clear indicator that someone has epilepsy, or do you have to have a combination of symptoms for it to be said to be epilepsy?
It usually depends on the conditions. For example, like what she was giving here, if she tells you she's waking up very tired, fatigued, feeling some lightheadedness, and then she had also wet the bed, and then you look at the timing as to when that happened, you can almost be able to guess that there could be epilepsy here. But physicians and clinicians usually go ahead and do some investigations like EEG and magnetic resonance imaging or even CT scan when they are available. But their most importance is just to refine the diagnosis and to classify the seizures and the epilepsy type, and also to inform on treatment depending on where you find the damage in the brain.
Now, Millicent, your day-to-day life, are there things that you've had to do away with, things that you shy away from because they probably trigger the seizures?
First is noise from if I can put on my earphones, it's gonna affect me. I feel like my brain, something, it's like a fly inside my brain when I put the earphones. The second one is lights. If I'm going to sleep and I get into a room which is lighted, I feel my eyes, I feel like I'm seeing stars, and immediately if I go to sleep immediately, I get seizures. The third one is stress. If I have stress, I'll get seizures.
About 70% of newly diagnosed children and adults with this condition can actually be successfully treated with the anti-epileptic drugs.
Yeah, that's very true. So with the currently available drugs, if you give them the right medication and the appropriate dose, and the number seems to be even going up to 80% with the new drugs that are coming up. But like you said, 20 to 30% will be refractory to treatment, meaning that they are not going to respond. And some people currently are also using the ketogenic diet, although a lot of research is still ongoing to understand how that is happening. And some people have actually been talking about using cannabinol, which is an extract from cannabis sativa, and again, it is still undergoing a clinical trial.
What are some of the scenarios you've had to deal with when it comes to your condition?
I was talking to someone, just like the way we are talking, and I just had a seizure. And instead of my friend helping me, she ran away. She didn't know, I don't know if she didn't know what to do to me, but she told me, no, I think it's communicable or it's contagious. Yeah.
And this is a friend you had known for a while?
Yeah.
And they knew about your condition?
Yeah, I told her about my condition.
But when it happened, she ran?
Yeah.
Do people believe that you have epilepsy?
No. First of all, my family say, no, you don't have epilepsy. It's just a myth, and you should not believe that you have epilepsy.
Dr. I know you've had this over and over again. Now, if there's one thing that I'd like you to clarify from the get-go, is epilepsy a mental condition?
Epilepsy and mental health conditions are so much related because all of them come from the brain and may be caused by the same mechanism. These two conditions might actually be caused by similar risk factors. So you might be having a neurological damage in the brain that leads to both epilepsy and that leads to mental health problems. And then also genetics. We found that there are shared genes between mental health and epilepsy. So from our studies, we've been able to establish that mental health sometimes may actually predispose somebody to developing epileptic seizures, and the same way loud, you might have epilepsy making somebody get more mental health problems.
Millicent, now that the parents told you not to take the medication, were they the ones financing the medication?
No, when I was 19, I was still in campus, and I used to get the medication from school. And I used to take medication when I was in campus. But after university, my mom told me, no, you don't need to take the medication anymore.
So she would take it away from you, or what would she do?
No, she used to just like, is this condemn me? So she tells me, just take a lot of water.
Dr. How much of these myths and misconceptions hinder treatment?
I would say that's a very important cause of the treatment gap in Africa and in Kenya, and it not only affects the treatment but also the diagnosis, because when people have misperceptions about the causes of epilepsy and they believe that it is caused by evil spirits, witchcraft, generation curses, they will actually not come forward to the healthcare facilities for diagnosis. So they will actually be missed and they will be living with epilepsy there in the community.
You talked about rural, where you do a lot of your research, and the pockets of the country that have more epilepsy cases than others. Explain that.
These people cannot be able to access quality health care, so they get ill, they don't get treatment, they develop complications from those infections, they get their brain damaged, and then they get the epilepsy. Then when epilepsy sets in, it even drives them more and more into poverty, because they are probably not going to get employed because of the condition that they are having. So that becomes like a vicious cycle. The second point is risk factors such as infections. For example, in Kilifi, Kenya, the incidence of malaria is very high, and some of those children ends up getting what we call cerebral malaria, which has a direct damage on the brain. And in one study, we followed them over a period of about 9 to 10 years and found that about 30% of them developed epilepsy. And that was just 10 years, meaning that the number could even be greater if you follow for a much longer period.
Now, Millicent, let's talk about treatment. It is a costly affair because you're constantly on medication and some other tests that help you manage it. How does that look for you?
For the nocturnal epilepsy, it was a bit hard for me because the drugs that I was supposed to take, they don't manage my seizures at all. I used to get like recurrent seizures. I think the only thing the government should just give us sleep study laboratories so that people who have nocturnal epilepsy can get better treatments. Yeah.
And the cost of it, is it alleviated by NHIF, insurance companies? Do they take up that cost?
Yeah, they do, but sometimes you find the hospital doesn't have the medicine which you've been advised to take. So it becomes quite expensive because sometimes you can get a tablet for 100 bob. It all depends with how many seizures you have. Sometimes I used to take 1 tablet, sometimes twice, two tablets a day. Yeah.
Okay, Dr. Those gaps clearly are there in the health system. What should policymakers keep in mind?
I think we need to really create a lot of awareness to the government about this. So I've seen they are doing quite a lot of effort with the universal health coverage, and I was also looking through the NHIF package, and I saw that most of the anti-epileptic drugs are actually covered. They are even listed there, but it will not be all of them. Some people don't respond to the standard anti-epileptic drugs, and they will probably need to go and buy elsewhere, which is expensive. So the government need to probably expand that list in consultation with organizations like the National Epilepsy Coordination Committee.
Now, Millicent, clearly being diagnosed with epilepsy is not the end of the road. Yeah, you're still here living a fulfilled life. What would you like people to understand?
I would really want people to know that epilepsy is not the end of life. You can still achieve your dreams. And for the people employing people living with epilepsy, they should not discriminate them. You can't really know if I have epilepsy. Yeah, it's not written like, you know, you have epilepsy. You can still do day-to-day work, even if it's a bit challenging because of the weakness and tiredness, but you can still achieve your dreams if you want to.
With the right support and, of course, people walking with those living with epilepsy, these guys can live a fulfilled life as you've had from Millicent Werimo. Thank you for your time. And Dr. Simon Karuki, who is not only a researcher, but also part and chairman of the National Epilepsy Coordination Committee. Remember, epilepsy is not a death sentence, but a lot of support, both resources and otherwise, is needed for those living with this condition. Time for the health tip.
Detox. You've probably heard of it or even tried it. And you know, let me just clarify that there are no toxins that accumulate in your body that need to be cleansed. And there's nothing that you're going to consume that's actually going to make your liver, your kidney, your skin, or your lungs, which are your natural inborn detox mechanisms that God put there. Nothing is going to make that function better. So what do you need to do? It's very simple. If you know you went overboard consuming food stuff, just come back to regular balanced diet, portion kind of eating. Stop drinking those roast, spinach and that kind of stuff. Honestly, it's not healthy for you. But hey, come on, just adapt a healthy lifestyle. You do not need any detox. Your body does it for you.
Thank you for reaching out on our social media handles, and keep your comments coming through. And of course, your questions. My name is Gladys Gashenja, and this has been Health Diary, coming to you from the Concord Hotel and Suites. Until next time, see you. Misconceptions. It makes those living with the condition shy away from treatment. Akina venikuwa nimeenda vizuri.